Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today, 29th of July, which marks 5th anniversary of National Education Policy 2020. We know that there are several events happening today to mark this day, and there are multiple organizations who are doing fabulous work to make sure these ideas are translated into reality. What we are going to do in this webinar is basically we are going to look at the chapter 8 related recommendations. Why do we think chapter 8 related recommendations are important? That we know there are several data and evidences like the NAS assessment data that comes out every year or ASER data. We know that we have progressed in terms of achieving universal enrollment. However, quality of education has been a concern. Now, if quality of education is once in a while not achieving the set benchmark, that can certainly be seen as some flaw in the implementation. However, if after 75 years of independence, we think that consistently we are not able to achieve the set learning parameters, then certainly we find that there is need to find problems in the system, in the design, the way things are implemented. So we do think that governance of education also require 21st century lens to look into it. And in that context, NEP sets the right tone. It talks about certain problems that it has identified, and it also suggests recommendations as a solution. I would like to read out one paragraph from the National Education Policy, the paragraph 8.2. It says, and I quote, it says, the NEP identifies conflict of interest as the core issue of the current regulatory framework, and it states, quote, at present, all main functions of governance and regulation of the school education system, namely the provision of public education, the regulation of education institutions, and policy making, are handled by a single body. Is that the Department of School Education or its arms? This leads to conflict of interests and excessive centralized concentration of power. It also leads to ineffective management of the school system, as efforts towards quality educational provision are often diluted by the focus on the other roles, particularly regulation, that the Department of School Education also performs. So I think this paragraph itself sets the context of the problem identified by the NEP drafting committee members and therefore solution given. So in this context, we understand talking about the governance related challenges, NEP recommendations therein as to how NEP suggests this can be solved, and therefore the implementation status. So we want to keep focus of this webinar only on chapter 8 related recommendations, which is about the governance reform and structure and design. Now, to further better understand these ideas, we have a small video, 2.5 minutes video, which is produced by Central Square Foundation. I would like my colleague to play this video. And this video is, the ideas mentioned in this video are not of CCS or CSF, but actually these ideas have been quoted in the NEP itself. I request my colleague to play the video, please.
Which school would you choose for your child? Would your decision change? With the right information, we can make the right decisions. Chapter 8 of the National Education Policy calls for schools to share how children are actually learning. As we mark 5 years of the NEP, let's unpack this powerful idea and hear from voices who've shaped India's education journey.
We look at the school playground, the building, and then put our child in the school without really looking at the quality of education. So if the invisible learning outcomes are made public, the parents will choose the school wisely, and the schools will pay a lot of attention to the learning outcomes.
If as a government we care about improving education outcomes for all Indians, it's important to think about both the public system and the private system. What the government can do to empower parents and thereby encourage schools to focus on better teaching and learning and outcomes is by investing in independent measurement of outcomes and then declaring that as through transparent report cards. By providing better information, you create the competitive pressure for both the public schools to get better and for the private schools to get better, and that's how we will improve overall systemic education performance.
Data alone isn't enough. The parents and the community must be able to access the data. And there are various existing forums where this can be done. The parent-teacher meetings, the school developmental management committees, school report cards.
I think it's very important to bring parents in not just as people who will give inputs, but people who will be active, engaged participants in their children's learning.
India's National Education Policy 2020 strongly champions public disclosure to ensure accountability. Public disclosure of student learning data, hence, is not just a good practice, but should be made a national priority.
And at the outset, I would like to invite Mr. Gurcharan Das to deliver his keynote address. As a brief introduction, Mr. Gurcharan Das is a noted author, commentator, and a public intellectual. A luminary in his own right, Mr. Das stands as a best-selling author and former CEO of Procter & Gamble India. His incisive commentaries grace the pages of major national and international publications, often delving into critical analysis of Indian economy and society. A staunch advocate of classical liberalism, Mr. Gurcharan Das continues to wield his influence and insights to propel the liberal discourse forward. And also, we are honored to have Mr. Gurcharan Das as our mentor and board member of the Center for Civil Society. Gurcharan sir, please.
Well, thank you, Amit. This is not a keynote address. This is 5-7 minutes of opening remarks for the really wise people who are going to follow me, who know the subject well, and who are going to enlighten us about the issues related to India's education. One of the best things to happen in the recent times to Indian education was the new educational policy on 2020. It was truly a visionary look at India's education future. And it gave hopes to many of us, to people like me, that there was something that could take us out from our dark present. So before I talk about our dark present, let me just quickly tell you, because you're going to go plunge into chapter 8, that my favorite part, the most visionary part of this policy was, in fact, its stated desire in paragraph after paragraph to kill rote learning in India that has produced a nation of parrots, repeating and repeating, and killed the desire, the joy of learning in our children. And replace this rote learning system of decades, of a century, by genuine inquiry-based learning. Inquiry, the way a curious child learns and discovers the world. And I'm happy to say that there are organizations from that time who have taken up this challenge But that's not the agenda for today. Today, we are going to focus, as you've pointed out, to the area of governance. And that really is a very dismal story in our education, and goes a long way to explaining the failure of our education. Although 98% of our children are in school today, and that's an achievement in itself, the fact is that only about 15 to 20% really get a decent education. Of course, the numbers in India are such. In a country of 1.4 billion, even 15 to 20% have made a huge difference. They have created the Bangalores, the Punes, the Hyderabad, the Gurgaons of our society in the last few years. And in fact, they have been able to keep our economic growth rate since 1991. That means over the last 30 years, at an average of 6.5% a year. And that, for a democracy, is truly outstanding. However, the sad truth is that the average child really suffers from a lack of proper education. The year after year, the Pratham report shows us the extent of our failure. The ASA reports tell us that children in class 5, half the children in class 5 cannot do what a child in class 3 is doing, and it should be doing. And they have told us that the governance failure is about the fact that there's teacher absence in schools. It's improved in recent times, but it's bad enough for half the parents in the country to remove their children from government schools to private schools. Now, in most countries, the word private school, you think of as an elite school. But in our country, where really the middle class abandoned government schools as half a day, I mean, the last generation, a quarter of a century ago. But now even the poor have abandoned it. And so the average private school has its fees less than 500, between 500 to 1,000 a month. So that's hardly an elite school. And even those private schools are not performing to the level that we should have. And that is because license Raj still exists in education. License Raj went away in industry in 1991. But in education, I'm afraid it persists to the point that young idealistic people who want to start a private school, for the poor especially, they run away, as a friend of mine did a few years ago when she brought all her savings to India from the United States, because where she had been the teacher of the top US private school, Andover. And it was just the corruption is what killed her. So killed her dreams, I must say. She went back to America. So what then is the answer? And that is what our panel is going to discuss today. That it's going to talk about the fact that the NEP, the National Education Policy has recommended a regulator for education that will be independent. Now, that's a challenge in itself, because many regulators in India have not lived up to their expectations. They've been retired government officials who've come from the same department and have just not provided that independence. So that's one particular challenge. But the bigger one has already been pointed out in the video, as well as that the fact that today education has been measuring inputs. The government measures inputs, whether there's so many teachers in school, so many classrooms, the size of the classroom, etc., the toilets, the playing field, all important things, but not learning outcomes. That's the most important thing that parents want. And these outcomes, then a parent doesn't even know how a child is actually doing. So how do you help the child when you don't know how the child is doing? So I think our panel is going to talk about outcomes, and also hopefully the regulator will, because it is really responding to the problem of the conflict of interest. Conflict of interest today in the government is the fact that the player is also the umpire, meaning the education department which runs schools is also the department that measures the performance of schools, audits the schools. And so that conflict of interest was pointed out in the NEP, and hopefully now, once the regulators come, and I'm afraid to say that so far the states have been dragging their feet on this, and what the challenge is, how do we get votes in elections from politicians, for politicians to come up and talk about something that concerns the future of children. So my point was that once the regulator comes, also because it will be looking at both outcomes in government schools and private schools, this will result in hopefully cleaning up the corruption that exists in the system. So with that, let me turn over to my very distinguished panel, people who know a lot. I'm looking forward to listening and getting some answers from these wonderful people. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Gurcharan Das. And you have set the context right for this webinar, for this panel discussion. So the key idea is there is a conflict of interest, and therefore it requires separation of functions. To do the separation of function, it requires certain system, process, capacity to be built. We will discuss all of those things, and we will also see how the idea can be implemented, where are the bottlenecks, how can those be overcome, and we can move forward. Now I'll start the panel discussion. We have 4 distinguished panelists for this discussion. And I think I'm really glad with the kind of people we have on this panel who bring specific knowledge of the segment. First, I would briefly introduce my panelists for the day. My first panelist will be Dr. Leena Chandran Wadia. She comes from the University of Transdisciplinary Health Sciences and Technology. Dr. Wadia received her PhD in physics from the Indian Institute of Social Science, Bangalore, and has been a researcher at several places in India and abroad. She has also served in the corporate sector as Senior Vice President and CTO of a startup company in the telecom sector called Netcore Cloud Private Limited. Leena had the privilege to serve as a member of the technical secretariat to the Dr. Kasturi Rangan Committee, set up to prepare India's new national education policy, and as a member of the drafting committee of the NEP 2019, that was a precursor to the government's policy NEP 2020, released in July, 29th of July today. We welcome Dr. Leena Chandran Wadia. I think your experience will be invaluable to us. The second, my distinguished panelist is Professor Geeta Gandhi Kingdon. She comes from University College London. Professor Kingdon is a professor at the Institute of Education, University College London, where she holds the chair of Education Economics and International Development. Prior to this, she was a research fellow for 11 years at the Department of Economics, University of Oxford. In India, she has been a member of the earlier MHRDs, which is called now Education Ministry, joint review missions of public education programs, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, and the Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, and is a member of the Uttar Pradesh Secondary Education Board. Professor Kingdon is also president of the board of City Montessori School, Lucknow, which has more than 52,000 students. She divides her time between the UK and India. My third panelist here is Professor Praniti Panda. She is from National Institute of Education Planning and Administration, NEPA. Professor Panda served as head of the Department of School and Non-Formal Education, School Standards and Evaluation Unit, and Comparative Education and International Cooperation of NEPA. Professor Panda is the founder architect of the development and institutionalization of National Program on School Standards and Evaluation, Shala Siddhi, popularly known as, for school quality assurance and accreditation system in India. Professor Panda is an internationally acclaimed educator having specialization in governance, regulation, standard setting, quality assurance, and accreditation in the education sector. And these are all important components when we imagine this state school standard authority. My fourth and final panelist today is Mr. Kapil Khurana from Central Square Foundation. Kapil leads school governance in Central Square Foundation as its associate director and is working with the education department in 4 Indian states in supporting their governance reforms. He has 18 years of experience in K-12 school learning improvement with hands-on expertise in large-scale assessments, psychometrics, and school quality framework implementation. So Kapil brings his hands-on experience working with states to introduce these reform ideas. Now, once again, welcome to all the distinguished panelists. And now let's hit the subject. The topic we are covering today is the governance reforms. What are the problem? Why we thought of the solution? Why drafting committee members, what ideas they had, how this entire identification of the problem, building consensus among the members, and thinking about the recommendation. So I would like to have Dr. Leena first to talk about and enlighten us about evolution of this idea. What exactly is the spirit behind this idea? What was the intention behind the idea, so that we make sure when the ideas are being implementation, whether those spirit and intention being achieved or not. Leena, ma'am.
Thank you, Amit. With your indulgence, I'd like to begin by paying tribute to Dr. Kasturi Rangan. He passed away on the 25th of April, just over 3 months ago. What was amazing about watching him was that he knew very well that if we got a good policy and we implemented it well, it could make a huge difference to the country. It would give a competitive edge to India and positively impact the life of every student in the country. So one could watch him put in the amazing number of hours early in the morning, 5 o'clock, and then when he got a little tired, rest in the afternoon and start again. He worked harder than all of us, chiefly because we had to only work on the topics that we volunteered to work on, but he had to be up to speed with everything. And he did that. He did that because he believed in the policy. And as the scientist that he is, his only instruction to us was that find the best practices that we have everywhere in the world, and we have to bring that and find the most latest research on how children learn to bring it into the policy. And I think Professor Geeta Kingdon, I remember her coming to, speak to the committee, and Dr. Rangan was so apt, listening so carefully to all the advice because he wanted to think it through and build it. But there is one other aspect of Dr. Kasturi Rangan. He was not a stranger to government. He had served as Secretary, Department of Space, on the Space Commission, Atomic Energy Commission, Planning Commission, and various other roles. So he understood government very well, and also Karnataka Knowledge Commission for more than a decade. And so he had also a very pragmatic streak in him that, what are the battles we can win and how do we do it, well. So that was Dr. Rangan. And so it was really a privilege. And if the policy is good, like Mr. Gurcharan Das said, then, almost all the credit goes to him, really. Now, when we started working on the policy, there was an incredible amount of privatization in the country already. Often we get criticism that the NEP encourages privatization. The 45% of schools, like Mr. Gurcharan said, half the kids, 45% of schools and 78% of higher education institutions were already private in 2017 when we started. What has happened is that the pandemic has roll back these numbers, and now only 30% of schools are private, if as per the data from UDICE 23-24. Okay, so this means that the public sector education is still, school education is still very, very big, and we must focus on public sector education if we are to reach the poorest and the most disadvantaged child. Because private sector is not going to set up a school in a hilly area where access to the school is very difficult and they don't get a critical mass of students. It's not commercially viable. So public schools are very, very important, but also we were very, very clear about the fact that private schools play a very, very important role, and there is the whole range, the expensive private schools and the mid-level private schools and the low-cost private schools, and we must provide a level playing field for the private schools. So this is the reason why many times we are told that NEP is sort of private sector friendly, but the whole idea was to provide a level playing field. So this 8th chapter was trying to do that, which is to say that when it comes to public sector education, there is the Department of School Education, and under it is the Directorate of Public Education or Directorate of School Education. The names are different depending on the state. But this body actually implements education, meaning is in charge of providing public school education in the state, but is also in charge of regulating the education in the state. So it turns out that most of the time the officers are more focused on the regulatory function, because there are opportunities for graft there. If you have to start a new school, you need a lot of permissions. If you want to change from the state board to the CBSE board or any other board, you need permission. So, this permission regime was what they were obsessing with, and they were not focusing as much on providing the quality education. So the separation of roles, meaning removing the regulatory function out of the provision of education. So now, if this is implemented well, and if the Directorate of Public Education is only in charge of providing education, then they, if the outcomes are not good, then they are responsible, to a very large extent. So combining their single role of only providing education with an independent standard setting and accreditation authority means that you have to self-report your standards, which is a good thing. I mean, I think we should encourage people to be honest and ethical and report correctly. But in order to also have an sort of a cross-check on the reporting, you also have the National Assessment Survey and the State Assessment Survey. So the provision in Chapter 8 does that you have a sample survey to just check the health of the system and to check that, what people are reporting is actually what is happening in their schools and so on. So the reporting and, the National Assessment Survey is very important. And lastly, the most important thing is that, schools need some guidance on, curriculum and, standard setting, that what is the minimum that is expected. Mr. Gurcharan Das mentioned that we want to break rote learning. But then if you are going to get away from rote learning and you're going to go after the interests and aspirations of children, they need suggestions on how these can be done in various, whether it is arts or sports or any other area. And so the standard setting function, academic standard setting function, was to be handed over to SCERT, just, not just textbooks, but, the academic standard setting. So, and then of course the school, Rukmini mentioned school management committees, parents participating. So there was a lot of discussion about the school management committees, whether in poor rural places, poor parents will have the authority to kind of participate in the school management committees and make their voice heard. But we said that it must be enabled, because when it comes to their children and the quality of the education, parents will find a way to overcome their own disadvantages to make their voices heard. So these are the components of Chapter 8, and the whole idea was level playing field, transparency, and accountability. And of course, for implementation, power centers, the current power centers are very unlikely to give up their power without a fight. And we are seeing that in higher education, and we are also seeing it in school education. But, Pranati and Kapil and Geeta will have, real life experience to report. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leena ma'am. And the keywords I take from you are the level playing fields, transparency, accountability, measurement of learning outcome, ensuring minimum standards of learning for all kids, whether private or in public. Now, I would come to the recommendation mentioned in the NEP to the first paragraph 8.2 that I read out. That clearly identifies the problem statement, because there is a conflict of interest, there is information asymmetry, and therefore, department happens to do things that possibly should not be their priority or where they should be focused. And therefore, when I read it, the way I see it, this becomes very important to build specialization on what the department or the regulator must be doing. And also I see some architecture for building efficiency in the system, because when it is clearly identified that who will do what, that builds specialization within the system and efficiency, which is required to ensure or deliver quality outcomes in any system, whether India, outside, public, private, wherever. So what is the recommendation? To address the identified challenges, NEP recommends a clear separation of role among different government bodies and setting up an independent neutral regulator for the sector. It recommends to bring the changes in the regulatory architecture in the school education space. The NEP recommends Department of School Education for overall monitoring and policy making, Directorate of School Education for operation and service provision, State School Standard Authority. This is the new body to be set up, to be constituted for effective self-regulation or accreditation of all schools, public, private, and philanthropic. And here I would like to take Professor Geeta Gandhi Kingdom. And I think we would all benefit from your insights as to why you see these recommendations are urgent, or why do you think these are so important that needs to be immediately addressed? And if you find some global experience in support of these recommendations, where else it has been implemented, and do we have evidence that these ideas are important, evidence, and this is how it can be done? Professor Kingdon, please.
Thank you, Amit. It's really nice to hear the remarks of Gurcharan and also specifically the remarks made by Dr. Leena, having been a member of the drafting committee. I think that the nice thing about the NEP for me was that in a significant departure from previous practice, it it was not in denial of the problem. It started with an acknowledgement of the problem. It, accepted that learning levels are low, which was something that there had been quite a lot of discomfort in acknowledging that before. So I think that was a really great thing. One of the things that I had written in an opinion editorial in August 2016 it was titled Elephant in the Room. And basically, I'd said that, without addressing the key issue of governance and accountability, the new education policy, which was in draft stage at that time, it was with the previous committee. It only just started with the TSR Subramaniam committee, that it'll get nowhere unless the issue of governance, which was the elephant in the room, was addressed. And I think that chapter 8 is a very thoughtful piece that seeks to address that problem of governance. I don't think that is the totality of the solution, but it's a significant part of the solution, because I think that it is talking about the governance architecture, which is very important. But I think there is also the whole big issue of teacher accountability and system accountability, which is a linked issue, but it's a whole different field of endeavor, which this chapter, I think, gives us a pointer as to how those, who have to deal with those issues, how they can be freed up to deal with those issues by taking away from them the task of the regulation. In particular, the task of accreditation, of school recognition, and the governance part. So I think that this is a key reform, but on its own, Chapter 8 reforms of governance would not be enough. I think there are bigger reforms that are needed, and if there is time, I'd be very happy to come back to what those reforms need to be. But coming back to Chapter 8 of the NEP, and in particular, trying to address the specific question that you've talked about, it talks about so many things that have been already mentioned. Of course, the conflict of interest, the excessive centralization, the asymmetrical treatment of government schools and private schools, and one prime example of that, of course, is, for instance, the Section 19 of the Right to Education Act, which stipulates that if a private school does not conform to the norms that are given in the schedule of the Act, it will be penalized 1 lakh rupees, and then for each day of non-compliance, it'll be 10,000 rupees penalty that'll add up. But those same strictures, those penalties are not made applicable for government schools, even though DICE data shows that a greater proportion of government schools, only about 14% of government schools, the last time I checked, were compliant with 10 of the norms in the schedule of the Right to Education Act. So it's a big non-compliance, but there are no penalties stipulated for them, but there are penalties stipulated for private schools. So asymmetrical treatment is very evident. And this chapter suggests that the State School Standards Authority, the independent, autonomous regulatory body that is sought to be established through the Chapter 8 recommendations, that would do away with asymmetrical treatment. And it talks about light but tight regulation, moving away from mandates, going towards self-disclosure. And I think all of these are wonderful things. And I'd like to talk in particular about, and which addresses Amit's question as well, that the point about self-disclosure and the point that Leena ji mentioned, that another check and balance in the system is that in order to check the overall health of the system and to help the SSSA in doing its governance job, its regulatory job properly, moving away from an emphasis on inputs, but looking at outcomes, particularly children's learning levels. Now, here is the point that I want to, a parallel that I want to draw about from the literature that talks about parents' information or parental information. And the video that you showed, Amit, earlier on, that 2.5 minute video was, I was very pleased actually to see that those, educational experts who spoke there have all of them spoken about the importance of information. And if we look at the academic literature, because there are many countries in the world that are bringing better self-regulation of schools through disclosure. So what they are doing is the government sees its job not as operating schools, but as funding schools. That's one principle that is becoming more and more prevalent and more accepted. That it's not so much that they have to operate schools, but they must be the funders of schools. So no child has to go to has to pay for themselves to attend school. But the second thing that government sees its job as doing is as being a provider of information, and information that is about the learning achievement levels of children in districts and at the school level. So, for example, imagine a town in which for every single school in that town, the board exam results are shown, or the results of a NAS test, National Achievement Survey test, are shown school-wise. And that would enable parents to hold schools accountable, because they could also vote with their feet and abandon a school that was regularly coming low in the, in a given neighborhood within a town. If there are 8 schools, and I have the opportunity to go send my child to any of those 8, I will try to avoid a school where regularly it's showing that it's in the bottom of the league. So school league tables are regularly published in I think there's somebody called Ravi who's not muted, wasn't this? Okay, there now. Yeah. So they every year when the exam results come out, they are published. The government itself publishes what is called school league tables. And this disclosure helps parents to keep schools accountable, in the sense that it puts pressure on those schools that are low performing to improve themselves. Those schools that are performing very well, they are incentivized to, because it becomes very public that if they've gone down in the rankings, so it incentivizes them to keep up their positions which they've gotten before. And schools that are in the middle of the rankings would like to show their parent bodies that we are improving. So this kind of a public availability of information is extremely helpful to parents. And there are some academic studies that have corroborated this fact. Of course, there are some issues about value added school league tables. So what value are the schools adding? Because it could be, one should recognize that it could be that the better off parents, or the parents from more educated more educated parents, might be sending their children to the schools which have higher outcomes. So we cannot just read off the raw scores. So I think those are issues that would also need to be looked at. But I think prima facie, this idea of self-disclosure, as well as, and that coupled with the idea of a sample testing and keeping a check on the health of the system through that way, and parental accountability of schools towards parents. I think these are some of the things that strongly resonate with some of the international best practices.
Thank you very much, Professor Kingdon. And we must identify the NEP document, because it becomes the guiding document to talk about shifting from inputs towards learning outcomes. And it talks almost everywhere. It's highly emphasizes on learning outcomes, whether in financing, regulation, measurement, institution building. So everywhere it talks about outcome-based everything. and now also outcomes-based regulations. Based on the recommendations given here, the institution that we think of. So it says now this new institute, state school standard, has to be set up, which should ideally be doing these functions. And in our opinion, because the learning outcome based regulation has to be made, and therefore there has to be learning outcomes assessment. Now, this assessment data also has to be publicly disclosed. It helps institutions to identify gap and improve. It helps system to identify gaps and think about where they need to deploy resources, etc. It helps parents to actually make informed choice and know exactly whether they exercise choice in terms of selecting schools or not. They know whether kids are learning or not. And but all of these expectations now are based on the recommendations and ideas which has been put forth in NEP. I would like to now come to Professor Pranati Panda. Ma'am, all of these are great expectations, but to deliver all of these expectations, we need to build the right kind of institutions, which is this triple SA. Now, based on your experience of one working with NEPA, working on regulation, governance, standards setting, Shala Siddhi, what would you recommend how this great institution can be set up to meet these expectation what Leena ma'am identified, right? Build ensuring transparency, accountability, focus on learning outcome, efficiency, specialization. I think that's a big expectation. Geeta ma'am talked about white elephant, and this is another big institute to be set up. Based on your experience, how it can be done, ma'am?
First of all, the very point we need to understand is that we have the diversified schools and our schooling system is in the developmental processes. Though we have been talking about access and participation, I think NEP very strongly pushed the centrality of the school to achieve the purpose of schooling. That is the holistic development of the learners. Though we appreciate the very concept of public choices for schooling, but in government managed school, we could see most of the students are from the very in a different economic status, you could say. So affordability of the private schooling and also participation in the government schooling need to be understood in the right perspective. And I just want to share with you that before we discuss about the governance, regulation, accountability, transparency, and public disclosure, I just want to read out one sentence, 8.9, that talks about the aim of public school education system will be to impart the highest quality education so that it becomes the most attractive option for parents from all walks of life. Therefore, we need to look at school as institutional space for learning, and we are expecting to translate a lot of the policy aspiration, including this NEP 2020. Lot of expectation from the schools, schooling processes, schooling practices. Therefore, we need to consider school as a delivery point and the empowerment of the school, even the empowerment of teachers and learners are equally need to be emphasized. And here we need to focus that school must change. That means over these 50, 75 years, we are still struggling with the resource deficit, but we are equally aspiring to institutionalize a very, very quality education for our children. Therefore, when we look at the governance, regulation, We need to focus on transforming, improving, and lifting up schools. And when we look at the very governance regulation, NEP has very rightly acknowledged the multi-layer governance model. That is, we have centrally sponsored scheme within the federal structure, as well as the state government playing critical role, that is Directorate of Education. Even we strongly emphasize the decentralized education planning and management. We know that theoretically we are having this concept. Howsoever, when we look at the schools are sometimes are standing alone or isolated, not gaining much benefit from the kind of investment we are making. From this kind of concept, when we are flagging the national education policy, I would put it in three ways. One is that we need to have a very independent autonomous body, that is state school standard authority, AASA, as independent body. Second one is that we need to set the standards for the school and develop a framework for school quality assurance and accreditation. Third point is that the very responsibility of the institutional structure already available, that is SCRT playing key role in supporting and state government department, or you can say Samagra Shiksha unit of the state government. As I want to share with you, first I would share the very decadal experiences of the National Program on School Standard and Evaluation, which was a bit ahead of NEP, but much aligned to the NEP recommendation. So how do we set the standards for the school education, particularly having the diversified schools in the very Indian context? So it was a very difficult job. After looking at many international practices, we could understand that standard setting for Indian school necessitate the very core functioning common across all schools, though they are diversified. So we identified the common core standard, which supported us to develop a school standard evaluation framework by the school as well as by the external agencies. On the other hand, we cannot ignore the very practices, ongoing practices of the school supervision to support the school to improve the quality. And many state agencies have their own format to improve the quality. So friends, the current structure, the Directorate of Education, the critical role of SCRT, and also Samagra Shiksha need to be delineated to support the school quality education. Within that, we need to look at where resources are available and where is the power concentration. Within that framework, what we need to understand that little bit on the international practices, what Geeta has already mentioned. So after analyzing some of the international practices of England, Finland, Australia, USA, New Zealand, Korea, Thailand, India, I have visited personally all these countries. What we could understand that almost all these countries have evaluation and accreditation system in place. And there is also bodies responsible for evaluation and accreditation, that is the institutional framework. Possibly in India, we are talking about the AAA. And also third point, which is very significant in all these countries are setting standard on core performance areas, and very significant is the methodology and processes. It varies across the countries, but for India, we had evolved a very, very pan-Indian model through the Salasiddhi program. And further, when we look at this school qualities, school quality assurance and improvement, and linking to NEP recommendation, we need to focus that it is aspiring from a very developmental perspective. That means a lot of concepts are aligned to it. They are talking about bringing this school quality assurance system in order to empower the school, change the schooling processes and practices, and also school can also understand their change process in a very, very incremental manner. And it has, if you look at NEP has focused on the quality improvement, understanding that the current processes are not supporting this. Next point is that though they have talked about the very change in regulation processes and structural arrangement by establishing AAA, the major emphasis is on the development of school quality and assessment framework SQUA. So as a sequel to Salasiddhi program and school standard evaluation framework, many states now are taking the very lead role and utilizing their evidence-based digital experiences to develop this document. I think Kapil can explain the many state practices, but what we learned is that even after doing 10 years of investment, there are many human resources are still need some kind of preparation to understand what exactly SQUAP means, what it should encompass, and how it can be utilized in a rightful manner. And when we focus on that, it talks about physical infrastructure, teacher provisioning, financial part, and sound process of governance that is focusing on management of SMC, SDMC, and critical role of the parents, and safety and security. So this SQUAP is focusing on this dimension, which possibly can be utilized by the AAA for public disclosure, bringing a lot of accountability framework to the school education system. Highlighting bit on the current status of AAA, nearly 4 to 5 states have already gone ahead in establishing AAA. But when you look at the very objective of AAA, the aspiration we are looking, expectation from the AAA, possibly states are diluting the institutionalization process. The document they are developing, the SQUAP document, may be learning from the Salasiddhi program, adding the state specificity and contextualization, but establishment of AAA demands a lot of resources as an independent body to actualize its true objective. Therefore, some kind of dilution, making it as part of the SCRT, or taking cognizance that states require AAA to improve the quality education. I just want to flag it here. There is a political will by many states the state government, the political leaders, they are very keen in establishing this, but central government is currently not funding, so states have to use their resources to establish that. One point is that it's in the very slow pace, in the very beginning phase. So we should not look at in a very critic model, rather in a very supportive model, and place the desired role and objective of triple SA as a regulatory and independent body. Possibly it requires more time, maybe uh, 5 years to go. And what I am expecting, but states are in the process of developing that. Me, Kapil, we had a very in-depth discussion on this. But I just want to share with all the participants that the desired pathways, the rightful pathways for establishing, institutionalizing AAA and rightful ways for using the SQUAB document, and also analyzing the large-scale database like NAS and making it public and sharing with the parents is a very, very gigantic task. So unless and until the system is not ready, we need to prepare in a very, very, I always say, very incremental, sustainable manner. Then you focus on the public disclosure and the accountability. Because we are at the crossroad, communicating any kind of league tables, communicating any kind of public disclosure at this juncture may create a very negative image of the government managed school, because now public and private school, all of them need to be accountable to the society, to the parents. Any question coming up on AAA, I would love to answer that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pranati ma'am. And as you were talking, and these are some important points to be made, I didn't want to jump in, but as we realize, when there are great minds talking, the time flies by. And I realize it's already 7:08 and we planned it for only 1 hour. But if people here are available, I know some of us have some commitment, but if we can extend, then I'm happy to run it by 7:30 so that we can also benefit from Kapil and also have few more questions and get the people talk to each other. Are we okay to extend it till 7, let's say 20:25 at least, not touching 7:30?
Fine by me.
Okay.
I'd love to hear Kapil.
Sure. Okay, great. So then I am taking that liberty to extend it and run this webinar till 7:25, ensuring that we don't touch 7:30 so people can also focus on their other things that they have to do. Now, Kapil, we are coming to you. We heard about the intention, the idea, the possibility, global evidence, the state capacity. Pranati ma'am, towards the end of her talk, she also identified some of the challenges, possible timeline. The set timeline under NEP document was AAA to be set up by December, by end of 2023. We are already in 2025. So we would love to learn from you. What's the status? What's happening? Because you are working with multiple states, providing support in terms of getting these ideas come to reality. So we would love to learn actually what's happening. Do you see there is enough for a strong buying to implement these recommendations? Are there bottlenecks which are identified, whether there is a capacity, intention to do it or not do it? But I only don't want you to identify the bottlenecks, and if you could also present the roadmap, how the future looks like, what the roadmap looks like. So Kapil.
Great, thanks Amit. thanks all the esteemed panelists who shed the light on the spirit as well as the letter of the policy, and particularly this chapter 8. I, in my capacity, work with few state governments in implementing this reform. And I must say that your question, Amit, whether it's, the timeline was 2023, abhi 2025 ho gaya hai. What is the status? I think when somebody frames these timelines, they probably don't understand all the nuances which go into setting up an institution like this, especially when, as Leena Man mentioned, that there are ulterior motives and conflicts of interest within setting up the body as well, which are present in the states. So everybody must acknowledge that it's something which is accorded a very high importance in the NEP. There's a full chapter dedicated to it, so it must be important. Second, it is one of those structural reforms rather than programmatic reforms. Programmatic reforms is that you set up a program, work with the system, with the teachers, with the schools, with the middle management, and get something out. That's a different ballgame altogether. However, creating an institutional structure with separate independent body, setting it up so that and hoping that it does its job well, it's a completely different ballgame. It's not easy. So therefore, this kind of setup will require patience, as Pranati ma'am also mentioned, will require time. However, let's also not be blind to the fact that there are issues in setting up within the state system as well. First, let's take the point of independence. Now, we say that the body should be independent, that there be a separate department, there be a separate directorate, which is running the schools, there is a separate SCRT, and then there is a separate School Standards Authority, or SSSA. Now, what does this separation mean? And how do you ensure this separation happens? There are models which are highlighted by the central government in their Samagra Shiksha scheme, where even for SCRT, it is mentioned in the Samagra Shiksha document as well as in the policy that SCRT as an institution will be invigorated. Now, the way it is envisaged for SCRT is that it will set academic standards for the entire education system in the state, including for private schools, including for alternate schools like madrasa or any other institution which is imparting education. The way some states have done it is they have set up their SCRT as an independent society under Societies Registration Act. So Gujarat did it, Delhi did it, now most recently Goa did it. However, it's not a norm. It's not something which has happened in all the states. It has happened only in number of in a very few number of states. So just getting SCRT to be a model independent institution for academic excellence is coming out to be a challenge for states. In that governance landscape, expecting that there be a separate independent institution for regulation, where the power, which regulation is, to be submitted to an alternate institution, to an independent institution, is something which is going to take time. Just understanding this aspect is something which has been a challenge for the states. So then another question arises, if it is a challenge, then what do we do? Do we not do, or do we just wait and watch? What would be the way forward for this? Now, states are realizing that there is a merit in this policy, in this recommendation. There are few champion bureaucrats who understand the letter and spirit of this policy, and do take initiatives which actually help that arm's length distance, which is very important when you are dealing with all kinds of schools, including your own government schools, and you have to deal with them in a way in which neutrality is not just projected but also exercised. So you have those champion bureaucrats who want to do it. However, they are also tied with different kinds of situations. They have political bosses to report to. And then you also have bureaucrats, you also have executives who are mostly looking up to the central government for directions on this. Okay, we have to set an independent body, but how do we do that? And then when central body also recommends to them, aap SCRT ko bana dijiye, yeah, put up any institution that you have currently, your education board or something, you appoint them as triple SA, put a cell within that, then that really dilutes, that really kills the spirit. However, Pranati ma'am has been a witness that central government has themselves appointed their CBSE as the triple SA for Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalaya, Kendriya Vidyalaya, and other central government managed schools. So where does that leave independence then? So this question is still on. 5 years to NEP, we are still interpreting this clause in the states. There is a lot of debate which happens on just the foundational element, just the interpretation of the wordings of what does this policy wording mean and how do we really set it up. There are definitely challenges related to how will this new institution be funded, or how will this new institution be staffed? Will it have another set of government officers? Because if it has another set of government officers, then no matter how much independence you bring to the institution, it will ultimately be doing everything that is set as the priority of the department. So these are the fundamental questions which still haven't been answered across the states. However, having said that, there are few elements which have shown promise, and which, if done right, will actually pave the way for the realization of the vision that Chapter 8 of NEP has. Now, what are those steps? What are those action items? They are that these states realize that all schools have that they are dealing with citizens, and those citizens deserve some service from them. Education is a service. Even government schools are there to serve parents. And one angle of this service is information. So the video that you showed is about providing information to the parents for all the schools which are nearby. Now, this information can be as simple as that here is the name of the school, here is its location, these are number of teachers, these are facilities available in this school. Can be as simple as that. And it can be as complex and as intense as what Pranati ma'am mentioned. How are the governance processes in the school? Whether teachers are empowered or not? How well are students learning? And that learning outcome information be publicized. All these are a little advanced elements of a school quality. So if there is a realization that these elements, this information is to be disclosed, then let's start with basics. Let's give parents some information, and as we go along, the quantity as well as intensity, quality of the information can always be upped. So with this spirit, there have been baby steps taken by states who want this information to be disclosed. The basic information to start with. They have started collecting information. That's a baby step. Now the next step will be to put that information in a format in which it can be disclosed. What do you disclose is also a question. What do you not disclose at this stage? Because not everything can be just outrightly disclosed. And that won't help the parents, and that also won't be beneficial for the state to be disclosing at this stage. So these are some of the questions which are being grappled with, being dealt with on a daily basis as states navigate through this reform. It's mostly walking on the eggshells, but that's how it is.
I want to give, let's say, 1 minute to each of my speakers here. There are 3. And if you could briefly highlight your disappointment on the triple SA idea or implementation, 5 years down the line, it's still not a reality, or your reasons for hope, both of it, your disappointment and why you are hopeful that it still can be done and is possible. Whoever would like to go first, but very briefly, very short.
Yeah, I'd perhaps say something, and that is that, I think that one point that was mentioned is about the cost of establishing SSSAs. But just think of the enormous cost of lack of learning, which I think is coming to some substantial extent from the fact that the Directorate of Education and all the officers below that, it could be District Inspector of Schools, Basic Shiksha Adhikari, Assistant Basic Shiksha Adhikari, Block Education Officer, District, or the whole paraphernalia that is meant to be looking after quality of education, because they are so engaged with regulation, in particular, recognition of schools and accreditation and so forth, that, and let's not mince our words. We know that part of the reason why they focus their attention on that is because that is where rents are available. That's where, that is part of, could be part of the reason why there isn't a very great enthusiasm for the establishment of the SSSA, because that would take away those rents that are available from being the arbiters. I'll give you one example. When in your introduction, you said that I'd been a member of the examination board of one of the states of India. And there, when I went to the first meeting, we were all asked, the newly appointed members, which committee you would like to be. And one after the other, every single person said they wanted to be a member of the affiliations committee. And when it came to me, I said, I'd like to be a member of the examinations committee. And then afterwards, when I came back, and I asked somebody who's knowledgeable about the subject, I said, I couldn't understand why everybody wanted to be, after about the seventh or eighth person had said that they wanted to be a member of the affiliations committee, the chair of the Madhavik Shiksha Parishad said that, can you please try to be a member or offer to be a member of another subcommittee? And the next member said, no, my talent is in the area of affiliations. Everybody wanted to be in the affiliations subcommittee. Afterwards, when I asked somebody who's knowledgeable, they said that it's because, they got offered money. It's as plain, as simple as that. So I think that there are, I think and therefore this is a very real problem. This is a very real, very entrenched problem. It's not going to be easy to establish SSSA because there are entrenched interests, like Pranati ma'am also said, that would not allow easily for this power over schools and over being able to get those rents to be removed. But yet the cost of not doing it is so massive for the children. And the other point I wanted to make is that, I agree about league tables, may not be, one should not perhaps go that far straight away, but then, to have incremental reform, I think the fact that children have waited for 78, nearly 80 years to have reform, I think I'm very impatient for reform. And I think the national education policy, so many of its excellent precepts have been implemented. I agree with Kapil, that those are maybe more programmatic. This is a more structural reform. But I think that if we really want to do the right thing by the children in the country, then we have to take the bull by its horns and not go for gradualism totally, and really push forward as much as possible. And, as for information sharing with parents, through perhaps league tables or somehow, any NAS information can give information. It doesn't have to be league tables, but each school should know how its children are doing. So then I think let's not imagine that parents are so gullible anymore, that they don't really know. And if they didn't know, why is it that, this year alone, there's a massive reduction in the enrollment in the government schooling sector? In May, on the 19th of May, in every single newspaper in the country as a whole, showing the DICE data have shown that just in Uttar Pradesh, about 21.7 lakh children fewer. And kind of benign explanations have been put forward that, fake enrollments have gone down. But in fact, if you look at table 5.1, which shows the government school enrollment going down, and you look at table 5.3, which shows the private school enrollments, you can see that it's a mirror image. 21.7 lakh children have gone down in the government schools, 21.4 lakh children have gone up in the private schools. So it's not to do with removal of fake enrollments. Parents know very well what's going on. And that's why, so I think it's a time that we need to be very honest with ourselves and no longer, think that parents don't know, so let's not share information with them. I think it's important to share information, whatever the truth is, let's share it. Let's trust our parents to give us the right guidance. let's trust the public to make the right demands so that the government can be responsive to those trends and those public's feelings. Thank you.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you, Geeta, ma'am. And everything that you are talking, it's such a good music to my ears. I don't want to stop, but my time is my constraint. So, Kapil and Pranati, ma'am, I would request you one minute each, please. Kapil first.
So I think Geetaji mentioned the trend of exodus from public to private schools. Today, we know unaided private schools have about the last data 36.3%. Students are going to private schools. This data has been increasing. Probably tomorrow, this number may exceed 50% also. Will it take that situation to happen for people to realize that that there is problem, that there is situation which needs addressing, that parents need to be respected with the right information and schools need to pull their socks up? Or should we be doing now rather than when that situation comes?
Thank you,
I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kapil. Pranati, ma'am.
I could see the ray of hope through this recommendation policy pronouncement. First of all, the state's initiative, all of you know that they are developing a swap document. It is giving them the opportunity to understand the schooling processes, and about the public disclosure, so on and so forth. So there are a lot of deliberations going on. I think it's for the first time in the country, all these agencies like SCRT, even recently I was there for the Northeastern region, they are like all the states are demanding for the development of SWAP and triple SA. That's one perspective. What Geeta was sharing, if I'm flagging, like as part of the Salasiddhi program, there used to be a school dashboard, which was talking about the school starting from the demographic profiling to attendance and learning outcome. Like parent could link that how many days my child has really attended school and kind of outcome, and also the school performance areas in code standard. And third point, I'm just
That's
telling
very
you,
good.
and also allowing the schools to take initiative for improvement, and regulatory body and other agency would be the facilitating bodies to support the school for their improvement. That we call the evidence-based school improvement. So I can see a lot of hopes. Maybe coming time we can do it institutionalized properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Pranati, ma'am. And as I said, time is not on my side. It's ending up fast. Let me conclude. And as simply to close this webinar, what I would say is the NEP 2020 implementation plan, Sarthak, has stipulated and converted all of these ideas into tasks, task number 211, 212, 213, and a specific timeline. But what it requires is converting these ideas into reality. I would say these are 4 R's. The first is review the existing education landscape and laws. Second, rethink an outcome-focused regulatory framework. Reform, develop the structure of the State School Standard Authority. And then finally regulate, implement a new state education law for light but tight regulations. With this note, I thank all my panelists, my opening speaker for the opening remarks, all of you, and also my team, which was working in the background to make sure this webinar takes place and happens well. Thank you very much for your time.